we have today our discussion of family money talks. And I particularly think this is a great topic. I've sat through over my many years in this business hundreds of family money talks. And I believe that more sharing and more communication is valuable, and that too many miscommunications happen because of too little communication or too little sharing, and that they're avoidable. So, this is a great topic for us today. Our speaker today is Ryan Sullivan, Vice President and Managing Director of Applied Insights for Hartford Funds. Ryan has an incredible resume, but he's got a focus on retirement research from the MIT Age Lab, and he's done appearances in about 46 states and been a featured speaker on over 1,000 of these webinars. So he has some degree of experience to bring to us. I think that'll be very, very helpful. Today, the information we're utilizing has been created by Kathleen Burns Kingsbury. She is an expert on wealth psychology. She is an author and a coach. And the agenda today really has three key points. One, what is a family money talk? Two, what are three types of intelligence that we need to have to successfully execute this kind of a talk? And three, how do you begin such a talk with your family? Last, we are going to welcome questions, but if you have questions for us, you must put them through the chat. So at the bottom of the Zoom screen, you'll see a little button that says chat. If you'll click that button and feel free to type in any question that you have, we'll collect those and we'll address them at the appropriate time throughout this presentation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan. Ryan, thank you for being with the Cooke Financial Group and our friends and clients.
Great. Well, thanks so much. Appreciate you having us, and thank you all for joining. Hope you're doing well and looking forward to our conversation today. So I will bring up our slides. Try not to overwhelm you folks with PowerPoint, but just to give you some things, a basis to think more intentionally about these family money talks. As Chris said, they're essential, but often folks are a bit intimidated about what they are, how to start them. So hopefully this will be a help. Chris laid out this concept of a family money talk as envisioned by Kathleen Burns Kingsbury. So as mentioned, a coach, speaker, she has a podcast. Her focus on breaking money silence, that if it is within families, couples, even simple things like us asking for a raise at work, all places where if we don't have discussions, we don't share information, typically that works to our detriment and that of our family, people we care about. So certainly part of our goal today to help dispel that. So in terms of a family money talk, Kathleen, or KBK as she calls herself, often starts by asking people to envision a simple version of a family heirloom, and that is a family recipe. So perhaps you all have one recipe, maybe many recipes that are passed down over generations, that are refined over time. Give you a quick example that myself, my two brothers, that we are still trying to perfect my mom's baked chicken. And you hear baked chicken, that sounds healthy. It's not. We have found it nearly impossible to perfectly replicate the crispy skin she would get on this chicken. Now she's passed now over 30 years, but we agree that she would be thrilled that it was so important to us, although she didn't write it down, that something we share as a tradition. We send pictures back and forth, comparing notes who gets the crispier skin. So for all of us thinking about what we can pass along in our families, it does get remembered, honored. And that difference between talking about, as we get into finances, our values, our personal values versus account values, an important distinction, and we'll talk more about that. So as Chris mentioned, what we'll cover just a bit about what a family money talk is, some ways that we can think about intelligence relative to finances, and last, how to get started with this. Certainly Chris can chime in, we'll leave time for questions, But very simply, a definition here that a talk within families about our beliefs, our feelings of purpose relative to money, what it can and should mean to us, to people we care about, to causes that we support. And to be clear that this is different than an estate planning conversation or the work that you folks have done, hopefully, regarding that. Things like a will, a durable power of attorney, a healthcare proxy. Hopefully you've done those. If not, I'm sure Chris and team would be open to starting that conversation. But for all that work that can and should be done, updating beneficiaries on accounts, those things are essential to do. And yet that is different than the idea of a family money talk. That the estate planning, if done well, can help limit some of the friction, some of the loss, if it is not clear where money should go, but still a family money talk where we, while we're living, share with our family, those that we care about, our thoughts and beliefs about money, but also to seek out theirs, find a bit about what they believe. And the more that we can understand that, the better we can do the estate planning and vice versa. So why this is essential, you all might not be surprised by the following statistic that about 2/3 of affluent Americans say they haven't had and perhaps never will have a conversation with their kids or grandkids about money. And certainly your choice if you decide that, and their choice. Yet we all know too well examples. I know Chris has some where people, unfortunately, when they don't have those talks, see the loss, the financial losses as laid out here. So according to one study, when you look over multiple generations, how without planning that accumulated wealth can decrease. Perhaps our hope over time that our legacy increases for future generations. As you can see here, very often just the opposite, especially if there are things like a family business involved and not all the proper planning about how to do that well.
And Ryan, let me jump in right here and say,
Please do.
I believe in the households that we serve, more than 2/3 do have this kind of a talk. I believe it's closer to half. It might even be a little above half in our experience. We encourage these talks. In addition, I believe this chart where the second generation sometimes loses a percentage of the wealth, and the third generation, almost all the families lose a good bit of the wealth. I think we're far more successful than this in our households because we have so many second and third generation members as part of our client base. And I think that the key to our folks on this call, it's not just to talk about money, it's to talk about our values around money. What do we value? We value hard work. Maybe we value living within our means. We value giving something to the next generation or sharing back to the community. The values help perpetuate a good relationship with money, which perpetuates that money stays around. It doesn't just disappear. And I think the value talk is the really crucial part of all this.
Great point. And I'm sure you'd agree as folks look at this chart that talks about the financial loss or financial costs to not doing that planning, the emotional cost, the friction between families, infighting, people who wind up not speaking to each other or suing each other, that certainly well worth the effort. And yet there are some myths that KBK, again, Kathleen Burns Kingsbury, would say that we need to dispel. And I'll show these to you folks. If you want to read them, you can click that button at the top to zoom in to just enlarge the screen a bit. But that by having these conversations, the next generation will be unmotivated. Again, it's not to say that we need to share the amount they may receive, those account values. So that is different than talking about personal values or purpose, that will lose control. Certainly things like giving or gifting while you're alive, those things can be strategies to consider and talk to Chris and team about. But still not a necessity. We're not suggesting, nor is KBK, that we lose control of these things. And the last one, this idea that it can change our relationship. That's true, but that also can be for the positive. And so when you look at the benefits of a a family money talk, that helping that next generation to be more financially fit. I think for all the concerns people have about work ethic, fill in the blank, about younger generations, they have different challenges. The costs of homes, the escalating cost of an education, student loans. So helping them to understand some of those trade-offs. Next, just understanding their values, beliefs, and hopes about money can be helpful to you. And this idea to transfer wisdom, not just wealth. We talked a bit about some of the challenges when folks don't do that planning. There are far too many examples, but one you might have read about in the news, Aretha Franklin, the great recording artist, love her music, but if you followed what happened when she didn't do much relative to estate planning, multiple wills, some in handwriting, one that was tucked under a cushion on the couch, versus the family money talks. It seems, unfortunately, she didn't do a whole bunch in either regard. And so for years, her kids wound up fighting, suing each other, certainly a indicator of things we can avoid with some planning. But that gets into, per Kathleen, what's important to understand about the three types of intelligence. And we'll go through these quickly, give you an example of some of the exercises that, if you choose to do this, you can have with your kids, grandkids, other folks you care about. There's also a related workbook that goes into more detail about this. But the three types of intelligence per Kathleen: financial intelligence, emotional intelligence, and then we'll talk a bit about family intelligence. Financial intelligence is the one you folks especially are probably more aware of if you're working with Chris and team, that understanding the nuts and bolts about things like saving and investing, gifting. So those things are essential, right? We need to have that understanding to make more informed decisions. And so just thinking about all this, useful, and certainly there are tools out there. I'm sure Chris and team can point, if you have younger kids or grandkids, how you start to introduce these concepts about saving, investing. But how do we make this something where it's interactive, that for our older children, adult grandkids, that we can share a bit things like vulnerability, letting them know if we've made occasional mistakes. I think sometimes for parents or grandparents, that temptation to make it seem like we've always done things perfectly. The challenge, if we never admit to making a mistake or having uncertainty, it's very probable those kids or grandkids won't share about their concerns or mistakes. One way to consider doing that, sharing a story. So again, more information about this in the workbook, but think about sharing a story as part of a family money talk about your biggest regret, and not buying or selling a particular stock at the perfect time, but more, if it is, there was a point in life where we made a decision to work more and be away from our family, and perhaps we have regrets, or we made a decision just for the financial benefit, not thinking about the other potential costs. And so for each of these, there are examples in the workbook how we can share that, and then encourage the kids, grandkids, others we're having these conversations with to do the same.
Ryan,
And
I was thinking about this when we were
please,
preparing, and it brings me back to my own grandfather, Sparky Forrest, who was my best friend when I was a young kid growing up. And when I was a young man in this industry, and I worked very hard, as my wife and perhaps even my children would tell you, and I did work maybe too many hours at times, and there are times I regret that. But my phone used to ring every single evening at 6 o'clock sharp, not 5:59 and not 6:01. It rang at 6, and it was my grandfather, and he would say, "What are you still doing at your desk?" And I'd say, I got a project, or I've got a client I'm working on, or I've got something very important to do. And he would say repeatedly, Chris, I've lived this. I built a business. It's not worth missing dinner with your family. You need to go home. Now, I didn't always honor his wishes, but in hindsight, there was an awful lot of wisdom. I think about it all the time. We can share that wisdom with our families and perhaps make the world, or at least make the world around our family and our children a little bit more about these values, a little bit more about relationships, and maybe a little bit less about that one extra notch on my business life.
Exactly right. And great example. I'm sure Sparky would love that you shared that story and something that we're now passing on to future generations. With that, this idea where why don't we make always the perfect decision? I think if we always made perfectly rational decisions about work, life, family, money, that maybe at least I'd be out of a job and maybe there'd be less interesting opportunities for us to learn and grow. So, this idea of emotional intelligence, that just awareness about how and why we make the decisions we do. So I'm going to share a quick example of an exercise just to give you a sense of how you can practice this, get a sense of your own comfort level before sharing it with family, but just filling in the blank on the following questions. So if you take just a moment and think, well, when I save money, I, and how you'd fill in that blank. And for some people, it's, I feel good. I feel like I've accomplished something. I have something to show for the work I've done. I've heard people admit, when I save money, I feel like, woohoo, now I can spend it. What's the point leaving it in an account? So, all these things, the more that you get a sense of what your responses would be and learn from people you care about what theirs are, as best we can without judgment, truly better understanding each other, but perhaps more important in us understanding why we're tempted to do the things we do, understanding, per Kathleen Burns Kingsbury, just how quickly these things can happen. So for some of us who've been taught growing up that we should only pay for cash in things, if we can't afford it, we shouldn't buy it, maybe with the exception of a home mortgage. But where that comes from, that feeling that, well, if I spend money, I might wind up going bankrupt. You think about, for many of us, if it's your parents or grandparents who grew up during the Great Depression, many of us impacted by the Great Recession, right? 2007, 2008, that those simple things can have it be where we're excessively frugal. My quick example, my grandmother, who grew up born just after the Depression, that she would reuse tin foil, aluminum foil. So she'd be putting aluminum foil on a meal she just cooked, and you could see underneath food from a prior meal. Maybe not the most hygienic thing, but in her mind, you had to save that aluminum foil. And for each of these, there are good and bad, right? For us to save, great. But if it is that we, even if we've done a great job of saving and investing, that we can't relax and enjoy it, Chris, I'm sure you have folks who you interact with where they're so stressed of running out of money that they can't enjoy what they've saved and earned for their family, those they care about, causes they believe in. One way to describe that, poor mental wealth. So the more we understand that, have a plan to work through it, the better.
I would like to take this moment and describe an interaction I had with a client. This was
Please.
quite a few years ago, back to 2002, maybe. A couple was at my table, and this was a rather difficult time. The markets had been down for a year and a half or 2 years. And yet, this couple in their upper 80s still had a solid $4 million account with me. And I remember opening the meeting with, "Is there anything on your mind?" And the lady, the wife, said, do you think we can afford a new car? They had about a 10-year-old car, and it was important to her for safety and other reasons. She wondered if they could get a new car. This was a Depression era couple. The husband jumped at her and said, "We don't need a new car. Our car only has so many miles on it. It's fine." And I thought, okay, we're confusing wants and needs, and we're confusing the importance of some different values, the wife's values versus his values, et cetera. And we had a really good discussion about it. They ended up going out and buying a new car that day. And I think everybody was happy at the end, but there was some real friction. How dare she ask for a new car when they didn't need one? And yet her feelings were hurt because her husband wouldn't consider her values but our old car might not be safe. And at 89, I think they were very worried about their safety. So interesting to have a discussion, an open and honest discussion. Perhaps I was the referee in that one. And it worked out really well, but you got to open the door to having the conversation. And why is this important to you? What would be the benefits of spending this money versus saving this money? How do I teach my children how to make this equation of pros and cons? I think these are such important things. And the
they are.
smallest thing, one car in the midst of a $4 million portfolio, it was irrelevant. But boy, we could learn a lot by just having the discussion.
And really, that's the crux of what we're talking about, the need to have that discussion, that we've seen it with market volatility at various times where folks get a bit panicked. They hit the panic button, they make short-term moves with their long-term investments, things that might feel good in the moment, but ultimately don't help with their long-term goals. And I'm sure, Chris, you would agree, this idea that people are more tempted to do that when they feel powerless. And yet, maybe folks have heard this, that we're never truly powerless. We can always make things worse, right?
Yes,
We
good
can
point.
sell things at the wrong time to make ourselves feel better in the moment, but that ultimately doesn't serve us or people we care about. So, great point. And as we talk about family intelligence, so this idea, you think about, we're going from the finances to feelings, the emotions, and now to family. The encouragement that you folks take a little time with the related workbook to think about your family financial tree, or what some folks call a financial genogram, that genealogy, that if you think about even your first instinct, the people you were raised by, maybe parents, grandparents, others who had a big influence on you, maybe an aunt, uncle, other family friend, where we start learning, according to the research, as early as age 5, messages about money, things about where people say one thing and do another. They talk about saving for a rainy day, but maybe they overspend. My dad would be the first to admit that there was a portion of his career where this idea that the clothes makes the man, you have to wear the nice new suit, drive a fancy car so people know you're successful, that there are obviously costs to that. And so it's interesting where, if you think through, for the people who shared those messages, maybe it's someone like Sparky or my grandmother, the things that we learn from them, maybe things we embrace and carry on going forward, maybe things we rebel against a bit or say, you know what, I don't want to ever be that stressed about money that I'm not sleeping at night or not paying for the essentials. And so another exercise you folks can consider in the workbook to practice and then think about sharing with family, that if you were to look, we'll just have you do one of these, that if you look at this list here again, you can zoom at the top to enlarge these, but some core values, just pick one that stands out to you as being important to you. That the suggestion, you do 3 in the family money talk with yourself, your kids, your grandkids, to share those. And then the question per Kathleen is, how do your investment decisions honor those values? So perhaps when you looked at that list, education jumped out to you. Is it that with how you're saving and investing for yourself, others you care about, that education is a priority? Maybe we say, well, we want to travel, but we haven't taken any time to allocate in our financial plan money for that, for ourselves, or if we're doing a big family trip. So all simple things where in being a bit more intentional about it, we can make sure those things match up. But the last thing before we pause and see if folks have any questions, just some quick thoughts about how it is that you can start one of these family money talks. So I won't read this aloud to you, it's all in the workbook, but very simply introducing the idea to the family. Maybe,
Ryan, just so everyone knows, we're going to send out this workbook to everyone on this call and
oh,
anyone else
perfect.
who would request it after the call. So we've
Great,
mentioned that a couple of times. I want them to know it is coming.
great. Yeah, so this idea of how we introduce the idea, even before we do that, to consider practicing it a bit. That you, in giving some thought to the exercises, maybe within a couple, or to do this with the trusted friend. I don't want to volunteer Chris and team. I'm sure they'd be open to it. That just giving a little thought to it and then introducing the idea to the folks you care about. Hey, that this might be fun, different, and in laying out that we thought it would be useful and essential. We want to know more about how you think about money. What's important to you about your finances, your long-term goals. And so when explaining that purpose, a quick list of, it's supposed to be a conversation, not a lecture, not an inquisition. But the more that the kids or grandkids think, well, wow, yeah, I'd like to learn more about, what your thoughts are, and I'd love to share mine. And then when you find the right time, this typically is something where you want to, not have it over around the Thanksgiving table where folks are eating while they talk, but maybe around the holidays over a summer get together. But picking one exercise that we shared, maybe two, instead of trying to have it be that you have this all at once, the hope is it's a start of an ongoing conversation, not a one and done interaction, but just getting where folks feel a little more open to share ideas, ask questions, be human, be a bit more vulnerable. When we do that, again, you can peek through, but as best we can not to judge. We want to understand the people we care about, so the more that they feel they can be open and honest without us making judgments, telling them that they're wrong. All of this is just things that are probably better for us to know while we're doing planning before we pass. So for the folks who say, well, maybe my kids and grandkids, we won't all see eye to eye, that's probably better to know now. If there are places where you disagree, to learn, to get on the same page, because after you pass, obviously, very tough to rectify that. That's where the saddest of these stories happen. So as I wrap up my portion, and we'll see, Chris, what you'd like to add, that this idea of passing on our wisdom, not just our wealth, goes a long way. And then Chris did mention the workbook that they'll send out to you folks. Encourage you to take some time thinking through that. So I'll take down the slides, and Chris, turn things back over to you.
Terrific. I think I'd welcome anyone who has a question in the chat. How do I talk to my family about X or Y? When is the appropriate time to bring these things up? How old must my children be for certain topics? We face these questions routinely, and I think there's no perfect answer to any of these questions. There is the right thing for you, the right thing for your family. Maturity differs depending on the person. But I think if you don't have these conversations, the risk is that miscommunications occur. And I think a couple of examples are really helpful. Sometimes in talking about our family values, perhaps we're talking about the value of love, relationship, of loyalty. I'll give you an example of a family where the father passed away at a relatively younger age. The mother was a widow for a very long time. And when she passed away, there had never been a discussion about the substantial diamond engagement ring. And it was clearly a symbol of many, many things about love and relationship. And there were a number of children, and without any discussion of who got the ring or why, that ring became in a way, a problem. It became an item of either jealousy or greed between the children without, but it could have easily been upfront. I'm going to suggest that this go to whomever, my daughter, my daughter-in-law, whoever I thought was the right person because of what it represents to me, what it might represent to them. They've emulated that, and everybody else gets something else of equivalent value. In other words, there was a way to have a discussion about the values, how those values may even have related to an item, and solved a problem that became really divisive amongst some family members. So these are examples. I think of another example of families, wealth, and decision making. If you're frugal and you're careful, things that appear to be frivolous don't sound like good ideas. You say, I would never do something frivolous, right? But maybe something that you are uncertain of isn't frivolous at all. I give an example of a husband and wife where the wife was in a wheelchair, and there was going to be a period of time where her health would allow them to get out, but yet had to be in the wheelchair, and calling for, special vans and things made it a little inconvenient. And so the suggestion was raised, why don't we buy a wheelchair van for you? Well, that's an awful lot of money for a couple of years. Well, yeah, but we buy the van in year one, we may end up selling the van in year three. But for that 2-year period, whatever that depreciation hit is on that van, what value might it create? And after we discussed it, it turned out perhaps that was one of the best financial and value decisions that we'd ever made. And to teach that lesson to the children, to the grandchildren, to the friends, it was a lesson of the amount of money we spent was by no means frivolous, or it was necessary. It created immense happiness and satisfaction and opportunity for family members. And we put more value on that than on whatever that amount of money was. I think those kinds of values, if you talk about that, how did it happen? Fabulous. And you teach great lessons. I think the other lessons that we always hear is the lesson of the generation that creates the wealth, typically through hard work, some sacrifice, some risk, some opportunity. A lot of times the generation that creates the wealth wants it treated differently than perhaps the generations that are going to receive the wealth. It's really important to have those discussions early. And if you're going to transfer a value system related to that wealth, that you not do it in one swoop, but that you do it chapter after chapter after chapter over a long period of time. And I think the more that those values are taught and reinforced, the more the likelihood that that next generation honors and protects that wealth, or does it in the way maybe that the original generation had conceived it. I think this is so important, and the lack of dialogue and the lack of discussion is something that we can help with here. And so we try to encourage discussion whenever and wherever possible. And you made a great point, Ryan. We don't have to share the numbers. We have to share the values and the themes. So with that, we have a couple of questions coming in the chat, and I thank you for those. One question is, Chris, does the Cooke Group provide estate planning assistance, or do we just refer to other professionals? I would say the answer to that is both. We do provide assistance. We provide guidance. We provide a lot of thought into how you'd want to structure your estate. But when it comes down to actually drafting those documents, those legal documents, even though Kevin McCurdy and I are both attorneys, we don't carry malpractice insurance for that kind of work. And we refer you to someone who can draft the proper documents. So there is a combination of planning on the Cooke Financial Group's end, and then I would call it documenting with your lawyer or a lawyer we can recommend to you. A second question coming in right now. We have 2 adult boys who work very hard. One is a C-suite high earner, and the other is a paycheck to paycheck worker in a different industry, but they're both wonderful. How do we have financial conversations when they're in such different places? I think more often than not, I am shocked at how understanding both individuals are. I'm going to, as a parent, have this discussion with a great amount of empathy and a great amount of kindness. But I'm going to share, you're both going to receive something, from us. These are the values. You live different lives. How do you feel about that? And if we have dialogue, I think you'll find that the children are already well aware of their circumstances, and they might express different uses for the types of funds, different uses, or maybe I should say different family values. But I think you'll be proud of what both come up with. But not having that discussion leaves open the question of, ooh, what would get done? Would I be happy with it? In other words, if I left money to a child and they immediately went out and bought a Ferrari, how would I feel? On the other hand, if they really needed a new car and they went out and bought a safe, secure new car, how would I feel? It's a discussion that we can have. My C-suiter might go out and buy something luxurious, which is sort of I could have done it on my own, but I feel like I can now. My non-C-suiter may have more, I'll call it traditional needs, housing, transportation, college. And I think the discussion of what your expectations are would actually be very helpful to all. And it also alleviates probably some jealousy or some greed, some friction between that next generation. I hate it when I see a family get upset with each other over money. It is my belief, most sincerely, that your relationships are far more important than the money. And I've watched it enough times that I've never seen it where I thought arguing or fighting over money was worth it in the end. Now, how do you prevent that? Discuss it up front. Have some understanding up front. So that was one. I've got another chat question coming in. Would it be helpful for the family's advisors to host these family discussions at their offices? I don't know that answer. I think that depends on the family, but Ryan, I would welcome your opinion here. If you bring it to an office environment, it becomes a business meeting. The numbers are going to talk more at a business meeting. If I take it to the couch in the living room, it's going to be more of a values meeting and a storytelling thing. I guess it depends on what outcome I'm looking for. Ryan, do you think?
Exactly right. Yeah, a couple thoughts. So for one, for the person who mentioned about having the C-suite and the child more living paycheck to paycheck, I've heard stories through Kathleen where imagine that higher wage earning person in a family who says, you know what, honestly, I don't really need much. I'm doing fine. I'd rather it go to someone in the family who needs more. And the pleasant surprise for people who said, you know what, I live the lifestyle that I want. I don't want or need a lot of money. I don't want a big house to have to upkeep. I like what I do, and kind of my free time is what I prize most. So that's just something to consider in having these conversations, that if we assume otherwise, sometimes that's to our detriment. But to your point about where to have the conversation, I'd agree. And what I've heard from Kathleen, that doing it in the the Cooke Financial Group offices, that does lead something to a hey, we're going to turn around the screen and talk about the account values versus at the family's home or a neutral place. If it is that there's a place around that we have families who've made this kind of a picnic type thing, where not just going for a meal, but spending time, having it be part of another family, not big family reunion, but a more intimate conversation, but also isn't one that is just, hey, here's the business meeting. We're going to put out minutes for this. Hey, we're also going to break bread, spend time with each other. So I think you're exactly right that giving some thought about the location sets a lot to the tone. And so just giving thought to that and being intentional about it.
The next question coming in is, if we have multiple children with vastly different personalities and vastly different financial needs, how do we frame this discussion? I think we start with the discussion of, we're a family. We love each other. We have some different outcomes in our lives, but they don't change how we feel about each other. But I want to have a discussion with you so that we are all comfortable and all on the same page with how at least I feel, or my spouse and I might feel about money and about our plans. And again, to get everybody on the same page and have them understand, Ryan, you made a great point there that we may not know what our children think, that it may come up in this topic and it may alter what I end up doing, especially if I have children from, kind of a high to a low or different. Maybe one has no children and one has 8 children. I mean, these kinds of differences could wildly change outcomes. And if I don't know what the kids think, I'm going to maybe make a mistake that I could have corrected if I was in dialogue with them. I'm going to also suggest, we've talked about parents and children a lot. How about parents and grandchildren? I am a fan of teaching financial values at a very young age. And I'm going to give one more example. There was a time when we were building a house, and around the corner was a little sandwich shop for which I got coupons often weekly. And the coupon was usually $1 off on a sandwich. And one time in line, I sent my 10-year-old boy, maybe 11-year-old boy, I said, I forgot my coupon. Would you run out to the car and get it? And he said, oh, Dad, it's just $1. Anyway, I said, that's right, but you'll go get it anyway. And he grumbled, but he did it. And when we got to the table, I said, it was just $1. But I said, we eat here a couple days a week. And if we ate a couple days a week for a year, that might be 100 times. So that would be $100. I was trying to lift it to where it was meaningful to him as well as to me. And I wasn't really talking to my 5-year-old child at all. But I'll tell you what, when that 5-year-old was about 20, he repeated that story to me verbatim. It's amazing how a story about we could buy a $6 sandwich or we could use the coupon and get a $5 sandwich. That lesson resonated and it will serve them well in their entire life. And I think we don't even know what a 5, 7, 10, 12-year-old is learning from us unless we express what we're doing and why we're doing it and why it might be important. And then they will learn. So I love this idea of a family money talk. It doesn't have to be something big and important. It could be as small as, why did we use a coupon today? That's a family money talk, guys. So what do you think of that one, Ryan?
Completely agree. The quick version, myself and my dad, I'm 14, saying, as soon as I can, I'm going to move out. Nothing personal, Dad, but I want to go experience the world. He said, great. Hey, let's sit down with the classifieds and just, work out some numbers. So we looked at what jobs I could get, how much a car was, how much apartments were, and he did not have to lecture me. I figured it out based on this experiment and said, I can't just go move out without saving and having a better job. No lecture involved on his part, but very important lesson gleaned on my part.
I like that one. Next question is, any thoughts towards gifting money to future heirs while we are still alive? Not sure what is involved in making that decision. Oh my goodness, so many thoughts. There's 2 or 3 things. There could be tax ramifications, and we recommend strongly to clients who might pay estate taxes to do gifting strategies. Gifting strategies enable you to have a very sincere family money talk about what your expectations are. Should that money be saved? If it's spent on what? If it's spent improperly, what penalty happens or what change occurs? If you just had the choice of, I'm not going to run out of money and I'd like to gift money while I'm alive, the satisfaction of seeing how it gets utilized is immense. And I think we underestimate the satisfaction of seeing, I'll call it an early inheritance, right? Instead of inheriting on my death, maybe someone inherits it during my life. And I'd like to see how they use that and how it makes their life better. And the satisfaction that the older generation can gain from that is often far in excess of the value of the funds. Now, I don't suggest that you give away so much that you impoverish yourself or put yourself at risk, because then you're going back to that same child and saying, take care of me. That's no fun. But I do think that this discussion of when, how much, why, what should we talk about, Wonderful discussion. I am always available, as is everyone on my team, to have that kind of a discussion. I've only seen good outcomes from that. Any other
Chris, if
questions
I can
coming
add
from Terry?
one
Please.
thought there. So, and this might be something you already speak about with clients, but if folks haven't considered this, for even fairly young kids, having it be where you help them decide how you're going to give money to charity and have them giving thoughts to you, suggesting to you what charity that should be and why, or something where the family they donate some money, but they also volunteer for that charity. Another great one where that kind of giving, in this case, charitable, great way to instill that in the kids for them to see the value of both the money and the time invested. So just another angle to consider.
Very nice. So much agree. We are going to send out to everyone on this call the workbook. I'm going to just hold it up. You've seen elements of it, but you'll get a digital copy of this. I think the workbook is helpful. We're going to also express that anytime you have a question, we want you to feel free to call the Cooke Financial Group. The beauty of working with maybe 850 families as we do, we've seen and heard a lot of different things. I can give you examples over and over and over that I think would be helpful, both examples of things gone wrong and examples of things gone very, very well. I will give an example last to kind of close this on a family money talk. I had a grandfather who was a CEO type, a C-suiter, and he came to me one day and said he was a little concerned about his grandchildren. One of his children had married a school teacher, and this child was a school teacher, and they worked for the union, and there was a bit of a us against the man, plug, hit the clock and do your time and then get out and get your pension. And the C-suite grandfather thought that the opportunity to start a business, to grow a business, to lead a business, in other words, to be the man, was maybe getting lost. And he wanted to create this for his grandkids. We set aside a fairly substantial amount of money, and we told the grandkids through a very beautifully written letter that if business plans were submitted to the committee, which happened to be the grandfather and me, that we would review those plans, perhaps make suggestions and approve those plans, and that they could have basically a loan or a down payment on a business. And we thought that perhaps someone would buy a lawnmower and have a mowing business or a variety of things like that. There were about 8 grandchildren in this family. No grandchildren wrote a business plan. That's my great disappointment. I thought that the way that the plan was conceived, the way the plan was communicated, the family value that it was intended to communicate, the concern that the grandfather had, that the kids might not ever see the joy of owning a business or running a business. I thought all of it was just fabulous until we got to the point that no one submitted a business plan. I don't know what we could have done better, but I think that that's an example of both the right and the wrong of this idea of a family money talk. So that's is there ever a proper time or a proper way? I don't know. It's only what works for you. But I would say that not having the talk, it doesn't make things bad, but it makes the opportunity for miscommunications much greater. So that the chance of things going badly are probably greater. So that's my sense as we have this talk. And a family money talk is a great idea. Sooner is better than later, and more frequently is better than not at all. And I would leave it at that. Ryan, what are your closing thoughts?
I would definitely agree with that sentiment. And even to your story about the grandfather CEO, just for the family to know that he was willing to do that. Because sometimes we take away, hey, no one chose to start a business. Maybe they weren't inclined to start a business, but if they walk away thinking, hey, he cared enough to offer to do that, that might have meant something to them as well, and hopefully something that he'd be aware of.
Agree. The last item that just hit the chat, and we'll close on this, was just an idea. We've challenged our grandchildren, 10 and 8, with a gift to their 529 every time they put money in their personal savings account. Interesting. I teach my grandchild the value and the value of saving, family value of saving, and I reward that value with a contribution to their college education. How cool is that? Love that idea. That would be a great way to have a discussion about family values and money talk with a 10-year-old. Love that. Thank you all for your participation. Ryan, thank you for your help and Kathleen's work on this academically. This is all terrific stuff, and I hope it leads to great talks. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you all. Bye now.